Peace and joy, guys. Welcome back to another video, Drumhiller Farms. Today I want to talk to you about something very important. When is the right time to go out on pasture? Well, if your cattle are like ours, they never leave the pasture. They're on pasture all year round. In the summertime, we move our cattle every 12 hours, focusing on rebuilding the soil, rest period of the plant, and recovery period of the plant. And in the winter time, we roll out hay on each pasture, and we kind of rotate them on a 2 to 3 week basis per each pasture. But when is the right time to go out grazing for the summer or for the spring? There's 4 factors that I would like to talk to you about that you should take into consideration on your operation. But first, I gotta roll out a bale of hay yet because we're not ready to go out on pasture yet. So stick around today. I appreciate you watching. I got 4 points I want to bring to your attention that I think is going to be valuable for you and your grazing operation. Let's go. This one's always banging against that bale. I don't know what her problem is. Four things to consider when going out to pasture in the spring. The first factor I believe you need to consider: don't let others influence your decision on when you should go out to pasture. I remember one of my first years as a grazer, I had a local dairyman tell me he averaged going out to pasture on April 9th. So I tried to listen to those words of wisdom from a man that was grazing long before me, and I went out on April 9th and I was sorry. I barely made one rotation before I realized I had to slow the cattle down tremendously. I slowed the cattle down so much I thought I was going to have to feed hay before I was able to get back to a recovered piece of land. And I think it's very important when considering when to go out to graze that you don't let other people, your neighbors or other farmers, try to talk you in to when you should be grazing your cattle. I remember speaking to a cattleman one time and he said, the pasture's green, it means it's time to put the cattle out on pasture. That couldn't be so far from the truth. I don't know how he made it as long as he had in the grazing business. What I mean is, your farm is not your neighbor's farm. Your land is not the neighboring farm's land. Everybody's land's different. Some people might be able to go out to graze on April 9th. On my farm, I'm not ready to go out to April 9th yet. Our typical time that we go out to grazing is averaging somewhere at about May 1st. Which brings me to the second factor. Don't let last year's date dictate this year's date. Every year is different. This year, we're the second week of April and we are close. We are very, very close to going out on pasture. But there's still 2 more factors to be considered. And number 4 is going to be very important for what I'm talking about right now. Not every year are you going to be able to make it on pasture in the same date. Last year, we didn't make it out on pasture till May 15th. And even then, I feel like we were about 5 or 6 days too early. Fast forward to this year, and it's April 15th, and it almost looks like we could go grazing in the next week or so. Timing is a huge key to your success in the grazing business. The way we've been operating our grazing business the last couple years is we keep them moving until about 3 weeks before we're about ready to go out on pasture. We'll put them in their last paddock. And that's where the cattle are at today. As you can see, I've given them about a 15-acre paddock right now. And what they're doing is every day they're going through and they're just grazing the tips of the grass that are starting to grow. You can see this 5 acres I fenced them out of, how much greener this side of the fence is to this side of the fence. But there's a reason why I'm letting them graze this down. I have 2 plantings of multi-species annuals that is going to help jumpstart this pasture. It seems in years past, when I've let them graze this last pasture, it's really took a hurt on spring growth. So much so that our last paddock last year, we only got about 2 grazes out of it because it took so long for the grass to start growing because it took such a hit at that early spring. As soon as they start to grow out there in the spring, letting those cows go and munch it right down to nothing. Which is why I've started to interseed these multi-species annuals inside this last pasture that we're in. And then keeping them in here just until it starts to sprout, okay? I've got 10 acres over there that I've planted, and 5 acres I just planted here today. I just noticed some sprouts in that 10 acres. I'm gonna fence them out of that, let it grow up. This 5 acres, I'm gonna keep them on it for about the next week to week and a half. I'm gonna pull them out of it when I notice the first start of sprouting. And then I will put them in this last lot before we start rotating them around all 3 farms. And in the meantime, they're keeping this perennial pasture down so there's not so much competition, and they both have an even start so one doesn't outweigh the other. Which brings us to number 3. Factor 3 to consider, we got to go to another pasture. Let's go. Look at how green this pasture is. One would think it's about ready to start grazing. And it's very close. But that brings us to factor 3. Take a look at your plants. See how far along they are in their life cycle. You really want your cool seasons grasses to have 3 leaves before you start grazing them. And here's a perfect example of that. You can see this plant, it only has 2 leaves on it, and the 3rd is just starting to form. And that's why I said we're really close. Now, I did look around and I did find a couple plants that did have 3 leaves, and even starting a 4th leaf here. Now, typically speaking, you're going to want to see your cool season grasses to have 3 leaves and your warm season grasses to have 4 leaves. But not every pasture is the same, and there's not consistently 4 or 3 leaves on every one of these plants. That's why you have to go around and actually take an inventory of several different plants and make sure that you're just not finding the nicest ones in the pasture while you're going out to do your picking. We fed a ton of hay on this farm. I tell everybody we actually graze cattle 365 days a year. They think there's no way you can do that in Michigan. And they might be right, except for one thing. I never said we were grazing grass 365 days a year. I said we were grazing our cattle 365 days a year, with maybe somewhere between 100 and 150 days on hay. And feeding hay is very important to our grazing operation. We took this whole farm and fed about 300 bales of hay this year on it, rolling out in a different spot every single day, allowing the cattle to start on one side of a field and graze a bale, or actually 2 bales, every day until they reached the end of the field, and then we would move them to another one, which that would take somewhere between 2 and 3 weeks. We let our other 2 farms completely rest this year. And next year, we'll pick one of those farms to feed hay on, just like we did this year. I'll bet, since we had no cattle pressure on it this year, we're gonna find that the grasses on them farms are gonna be even better than what we find on this farm, because there was some residual left. Let's go take a look at one of those other farms. But first, gotta feed the bulls. Hey there, Mr. Bulls. This here is the BNB team. Buster and Bubba. Buster we got from Greg Judy's, a South Pole cattle, 100% South Pole bull. We got from Greg Judy about 2 years ago. And while we were down there in Missouri, we picked up a couple bred cows at the same time. And the first bull that we had out of one of those bred cows was Bubba here, number 46. And he's turning into be a nice little bull. He's about a year old. He's got a great set of testicles on him. He's got a really nice rear end, and he's just starting to fill out in his front quarter right now. And even this guy's gotten a little bit bigger since we got him too, and they look even nicer when they get out on pasture. Check this out, guys. I always find this so interesting. I feed the bulls the cores of the round bales from the cows, and here's a beautiful green alfalfa bale. It's 4th cutting. I mean, this is the most primal hay that I have available. And here is a straight grass bale. It's not nearly as green. You can see that even in the camera. And look at which one they're going after. I seem to find that in all my cattle. Even the mamas. They'll leave an alfalfa bale for a good grass bale every single day of the week. Let's go check out that other farm. Welcome to the other farm. What do I mean by we let this farm rest? Well, we didn't feed hay on it. So when we're feeding hay on a pasture and there's not snow on the ground, the cattle are gonna graze that pasture right down to about as low as they can get their tongue to wrap that grass and eat. So they weren't able to do that on this farm, okay? So there was a little more grass left, because whatever was left when we pulled them off of it after we quit rotating the cattle every 12 hours and moved them over to that farm to start feeding hay, there was a little grass left here which provided a little more cover for the ground, which in returns gives your pastures a spike in the early spring. You can clearly see how much more consistent this grass looks than the field that we just came out of. And if you really start to look through, there's more legumes, there's taller grass, there's more diversity, and there's more grass in the 3rd and 4th blade growth cycle, which makes me think we're very, very close to grazing. But remember, there's one more factor. Factor number 4 is looking at your extended forecast. Grazing is all about timing. And if you're looking at your extended forecast and you see that you're about to get 6 inches of snow, or you're about to get, you know, teen temperatures coming your way, you don't want to go out to pasture, because they're going to stop growing almost for a little while. This happened last year, and that's why we didn't get out to pasture till May 15th. Things warmed up in April. We all thought we were going to have an early grazing season. We were ramping up. I put them in what I thought was my last pasture. And then we had several snowstorms after that, cold temperatures, and it delayed our going to pasture by about 3 weeks. And so that's very important that you're taking a look at that extended forecast. Now, if anybody knows Michigan, the common saying is, if you don't like the weather, just wait 5 minutes. Things are always changing in Michigan, but the weather forecast is somewhat accurate, even 10 to 15 days out. And within 10 to 15 days can make a huge difference in your early grazing operation. I would say take a look at that extended 10 to 15 day forecast. Base your final decision on when you're going to go grazing off that forecast. And we're under that prime example right now. The last few days has been almost 80 degrees. Monday, they're calling for snow, which is going to slow down this quick, almost spring flush that we're seeing right now. It's not going to stop the grass from growing, but it's going to slow it down tremendously, and it's probably going to delay our start of grazing, I'm going to guess, a week. All right, so a quick recap. Factor number 1, it doesn't matter what your neighbors are doing. Now, I got to clarify, that doesn't mean that you're not a humble person and take good advice from someone that may or may not know more than you. It's always important to be humble. Remember, it's nice to be important, but it's also important to be nice. Factor number 2, don't let last year or the year before dictate what date you go out grazing this year. Every year is different. Factor number 3, take a look at your plants. Don't just base your decision on going grazing by the color of the grass. If it's green, it doesn't mean it's ready to graze. And number 4, take a look at that extended forecast. If it's going to snow or your temperatures are going to fall out next week, you might want to just hold off on grazing for a little while and see what happens to that pasture before you make your decision to go out grazing. Good luck, everyone, on this year, 2023. I'm expecting a great year. We got pastured pork, pastured chicken, and of course our grass-fed beef operation. Even going to be running some turkeys probably this year in this pasture right here that we're looking at. I appreciate you watching the video. Hit that subscribe button. God bless. See why I said to take number 4 into a factor? It's snowing, and it's been snowing on and off all day. Woke up to about an inch on the ground. This is 2 days after I made this video. So the extended forecast is very important because we're gonna have a couple of days of this right now, which my guess, it's gonna slow down our pasture grow rate by probably a week. Could be less, but my guess is it's going to be about a week slowdown.